Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 43. Time as Meaning. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes, in the way time itself carries meaning.
We have reached a new chapter in our journey. In the previous book, we climbed to a great height. We saw how the language of phi forms stable, persistent identities through intricate stability rules that operate across the infinite tree of derivatives. We understood how certain patterns manage to last, while countless others dissolve back into noise. That was the book of how. Now we turn the page. We leave the realm of mechanics and step into the realm of meaning. We ask not only how the language works, but what it actually says. We begin to see that the dimensions themselves, time, space, and motion, are not empty containers that passively hold events. They are active semantic carriers. They are the primary channels through which reality speaks. Today, we start with the most fundamental dimension of experience, time. We explore time as meaning. This is where we begin to learn that the tempo of existence is not a neutral backdrop. It is the first note of the symphony, the first layer of how reality expresses itself. For most of human history, time has been imagined as a river that carries events along, or as a straight line drawn on a page, or as a parameter in an equation. In that view, time is a blank stage on which the drama of matter and energy plays out. It is just the T in the formula, just the ticking of a clock in the background. In the holophase language, this picture undergoes a profound transformation. Time is not a stage. Time is a voice. When phi changes, its first temporal derivative appears. We call this omega. Omega is not just how fast the clock ticks. Omega is the first utterance of meaning in time. It says, here is a rhythm. A constant omega is a steady hum of existence. A changing omega, which we call alpha, is a story of speeding up or slowing down, a narrative of building intensity or fading away. Higher temporal derivatives, such as jerk and snap, add even more nuance, texture, and emotional contour to this story. In this language, to ask, what is the temporal pattern, is to ask, what is this thing saying through its rhythm? Time is the dimension of narrative, and the temporal derivatives are the grammar of that narrative. In the holophase view, temporal derivatives act like the adverbs of physical reality. They describe how something happens, not just what happens. Consider something as simple as light emerging from a source. A steady light bulb has a constant omega associated with its electromagnetic oscillation. Its temporal meaning is, I am present, constant, reliable. It is the adverb steadily. A flickering candle still has a high electromagnetic omega, but its intensity varies slowly in time, rising and falling with a gentle rhythm. Its temporal meaning is, I am present with a soft, breathing pulse. It is the adverb flickeringly. A strobe light, on the other hand, interrupts its emission in sharp bursts. Its meaning is, I arrive in sudden, punctuated flashes. It is the adverb staccato. A pulsar, a rotating neutron star, broadcasts beams of radiation with astonishing regularity, yet with a very slowly changing omega as it gradually spins down. Its temporal meaning is, I spin with relentless precision, while slowly, almost imperceptibly, winding down my cosmic story.
In each case, the spatial object is, in essence, a light source. But the story that object tells, and the way we use or interpret it, is vastly different because of its temporal signature. The same spatial structure can carry completely different meanings because it inhabits time in different ways. A heart is a perfect example. The spatial structure of a heart is more or less the same whether it is beating or not. But a beating heart carries the temporal meaning of life, while a silent heart carries the temporal meaning of death. The difference is not primarily spatial. It is the presence or absence of a very specific rhythm. Each level of the temporal derivative tower adds another layer of meaning. Omega, which we can think of as a local frequency or cadence, is the letter of presence and pitch. It answers the question, how often does this essential cycle repeat? In sound, it is literally pitch, the difference between a low growl and a high scream. In electromagnetic waves, it distinguishes radio waves from visible light from gamma rays. In biological rhythms, it distinguishes a slow circadian cycle from a rapid heartbeat. Omega is the baseline tone of temporal identity. Alpha, the rate of change of omega, is the letter of narrative arc. It answers, is this rhythm speeding up or slowing down? A positive alpha is a crescendo, a building of tension or urgency. A negative alpha is a decrescendo, a release of tension, a winding down. When you hear a siren rise in pitch as it approaches and fall as it recedes, you are hearing alpha as meaning. It is not just a shift in sound, it is the story of approach and departure. Jerk, the rate of change of acceleration, is the letter of urgency and smoothness. It answers, how abruptly is this change itself changing? Low jerk feels smooth and controlled. High jerk feels sharp and jarring. The difference between a luxury elevator and an old rough lift is not just in their velocities, but in the temporal profile of their acceleration and jerk. The emotional meaning of the ride is encoded in these temporal derivatives. Higher derivatives continue this pattern, adding more subtlety. They show up as finesse in motion, as precise shaping of pulses, as the fine details in the decay of a bell's ring. Together, they form a kind of temporal handwriting that modifies everything else. In the language of everyday speech, this whole tower of temporal derivatives forms the adverbial phrase of the universe's sentence. It does not change what the thing is made of or where it is, but it completely transforms the sense of how it exists and unfolds. In scientific terms, the meaning of time is found in the structure of information carried by these patterns of change. If you can predict an entity's future omega from its past omega in alpha, you have decoded something about its temporal code. A system with no temporal structure, one that is entirely random in time, carries no coherent temporal meaning. A system with a stable rhythm, or with an evolving but predictable rhythm, carries a semantic message through time. We can see this clearly in some simple but powerful examples. Think again of a beating heart. A stopped heart and a beating heart have almost identical spatial configuration in the very first moments after the beat stops, yet their meanings are entirely different. The presence of a repeating temporal pattern is the difference between alive and not alive. All our medical systems treat this temporal message as fundamental. Consider a steady laser compared to a pulsed laser. Both emit coherent light of a specific color. Spatially, their beams can look very similar. But a steady laser says, in effect, I am a constant, pure tone of energy. A pulsed laser says, I deliver energy in precise, concentrated bursts. The applications of each are very different. A continuous beam might be used to provide a steady measuring reference, while intense, ultra-short pulses are used to cut tissue in surgery or to probe ultra-fast processes. The difference is entirely temporal. A planet's orbit offers another view. The orbit has a spatial shape, often an ellipse. But the temporal dimension adds the length of the year, the period of the orbit. Mercury's quick year and Neptune's slow year mean very different things about their place in the solar system. The period is a temporal meaning about the balance of gravity and distance. The same is true for moons, binary stars, and even entire galaxies rotating as disks. In the brain, neurons communicate using trains of electrical spikes. A single neuron can use the same spatial structure, the same axon and dendrites, to send very different messages by changing the timing of its spikes. A regular high-frequency spike train means something quite different to the next neuron than a slow, irregular pattern. The temporal coding is the semantic core of the communication. Even radioactive decay has temporal meaning. A nucleus with a half-life of millions of years is telling a story of immense persistence, while one with a half-life of seconds is telling a story of rapid transformation. The decay rate is not just a number. It is a narrative about the internal forces holding the nucleus together. Although we are focusing now on time, the other two echoes, space and motion, are always present. The rhythm we observe is always tied to something spatial that is oscillating or evolving, and often to something that is moving. The temporal echo is the rhythm itself. The spatial echo is the instrument playing that rhythm, the structure that makes that rhythm possible and that shapes its character. The motion echo is the way that rhythm appears in trajectories, in approaches and withdrawals, in cycles of movement. A heartbeat's rhythm is inseparable from the spatial structure of the cardiac tissue that contracts and relaxes. That spatial arrangement constrains the possible temporal rhythms. A pulsar spin is literally the rotation of a huge, dense star. The temporal pattern we observe is the way that very specific spatial and motion structure expresses itself in time. If we change the temporal pattern, we necessarily change the underlying configuration or driving forces. The three echoes are different aspects of one reality. In the master tree, time as meaning sits at the foundation of a new region, the tower of dimensional semanticity. It rests directly on the temporal nuance tower we built earlier, where we explored omega, alpha, and higher derivatives as structural properties. It also rests on the identities tower, where we saw how stable temporal patterns help define what a thing is. Now we reinterpret all of that as not just structure, but meaning. We ask for each temporal pattern, what does this pattern signify? What kind of story is being told here? This idea is tightly connected to many neighboring branches in the Holophase program. Temporal meaning is the narrative aspect of Phi's self-expression. Phi does not simply exist, it unfolds. The way it unfolds is its first layer of meaning. Omega and alpha become the primary semantic units in this unfolding. Constraint chains, such as physical laws, now appear as rules that limit which stories can be told. A pendulum cannot evolve arbitrarily in time. It must obey a specific grammar. Its allowed rhythms are the allowed sentences in that grammar. Wave semantics provides a particularly clear example. There, omega and k are linked through a dispersion relation. You cannot freely choose a temporal frequency and a spatial frequency independently. The medium enforces a relationship. The meaning of a wave is carried jointly in time and space in a way that cannot be separated. Changing the temporal pattern while holding everything else fixed usually means changing the physical situation. This whole view is highly falsifiable. It predicts that rhythms and temporal structures must matter. If time is truly a layer of meaning, then changing temporal patterns should change observable behavior in systematic ways. And indeed, we see this everywhere. For instance, in light therapies used to stimulate healing, continuous light and pulse light of the same color and average power often produce different biological effects. In such cases, the only difference is the temporal pattern. If the temporal pattern made no difference, the whole idea of time as meaningful would be weakened. You can see the power of temporal meaning even more clearly when you move beyond physics and biology into human life. Music is our most direct way of working with time as meaning. The same sequence of pitches, played with different tempos or rhythms, carries a completely different emotional message. A melody played slowly and softly can feel sad or reflective. The same melody played quickly and loudly can feel joyful or triumphant. The notes on the page are the same. The temporal performance is what changes the meaning. Storytelling in all forms depends on timing. A pause before a key sentence, a sudden acceleration of events, a long, slow buildup of tension, all of these are temporal devices that create meaning. The same plot, told in a different rhythm, is experienced as a different story. Even simple speech is thick with temporal semantics. The rise and fall of pitch, the speed of delivery, the placement of pauses all carry emotional and logical information. A simple sentence like, "You are here," can mean reassurance, surprise, anger, or confusion, depending entirely on its temporal contour. Monotone speech, stripped of temporal nuance, feels flat and ambiguous. Our cultures are built around rhythms. Daily routines, weekly cycles, annual festivals, and life stages all create temporal structures that give meaning to our experiences. Religious rituals that repeat at particular times of day or year use time explicitly as a carrier of meaning. A fast that begins at dawn and ends at sunset is defined by its temporal boundaries. Its spiritual meaning is tied to those boundaries. Technology, too, is full of temporal semantics. The clock speed of a computer processor is a raw temporal measure, but it also represents a kind of capacity to process information. Network protocols depend on timing to decide whether a message is valid or not. A double click on a mouse means something different from two separate clicks, and the difference is purely temporal. You can train yourself to read time as meaning in your everyday environment. Listen to a city, not just as noise, but as overlapping rhythms. The regular clatter of a train, the cyclic pattern of traffic lights, the irregular bursts of horns and voices. Each has its own temporal signature, and together they tell the story of that city's life. Watch a garden over a single day. The opening and closing of flowers, the movements of insects, the drifting of shadows, all play out in time. Each plant and animal has its own tempo, and the garden is the sum of these rhythms woven together. You can also use your own body as a teacher. Pay attention to your breath when you are calm. Notice its slow, steady rhythm. Then notice your breath when you are anxious or under pressure. The rhythm changes, and with it, your whole experience. By consciously slowing your breath, you can slowly rewrite the temporal meaning of your internal state. In that act, you are literally editing the story your body is telling in time. A very simple practice can make this tangible. Take a metronome or a clock with an audible tick and set it to a slow, comfortable rate. Sit quietly and listen. Let the steady tick, tick, tick sink in. This simple pattern is time stripped to a bare mechanical rhythm. Now synchronize your breathing with it, perhaps inhaling for 2 ticks and exhaling for 2 ticks. Notice how this imposed rhythm changes your feeling. Then speed up the metronome and feel how the atmosphere shifts. Without changing anything spatial or visual, you have dramatically changed the quality of your experience simply by altering the temporal pattern. We have now taken the first step into the heart of the Holophase language of meaning. We are beginning to see that time itself is not a void that things fall through, but a voice through which reality speaks. Remember that this entire language is just one field, phi, and the infinite, structured ways in which it changes. In earlier parts of Ep.7, we climb from the basic alphabet of derivatives to the formation of stable words and identities, and then up to the stability rules that decide which words can last. Now we have seen that the dimension of time is itself a layer of meaning laid over all of this. As always, we return to the source. The meaningful rhythms of time are not imposed from outside. They are phi's own way of being. The fundamental cyclic nature of the holophase is the root of all rhythm. Every temporal meaning, from the spin of a galaxy to the firing of a neuron to the beating of your own heart, is an echo of that original cyclic movement. Phi is the storyteller, and time is its first mode of narration. With this new lens, seeing time as a carrier of meaning, we are ready to look again at space and motion. We will see that space is not just an empty stage, and motion is not just a path. They too are languages of meaning. Together, time, space, and motion will emerge as a triunity of semantic dimensions through which phi tells the story of reality. There is another way to feel time as meaning, and that is through memory and anticipation. Your memories are not just snapshots of where things were in space, they are recordings of temporal patterns. The way someone's voice rose and fell, the pace of a conversation, the rhythm of footsteps down a hallway. When you anticipate the future, you do not just imagine locations, you imagine sequences. You picture how long something will take, how quickly it might change, how slowly it might heal. Your sense of hope and fear is rooted in this temporal imagination. In the Holophase view, memory is the way a local part of phi records and replays its own temporal stories. Time also carries meaning across scales. A hummingbird's heart can beat hundreds of times per minute, while a blue whale's heart beats only a few times in that same interval. Both are alive, both are stable, but they inhabit different temporal worlds. Likewise, a computer chip switches billions of times per second, while tectonic plates move centimeters per year. The holophase language handles all of these as different choices of omega, alpha, and higher derivatives. The meaning of fast and slow is always relative, but the structure of rhythm is universal. Across all these scales, temporal patterns allow systems to synchronize, to resonate, and sometimes to fall out of step. Another deep aspect of time as meaning is the arrow of time. Many microscopic laws of physics are time symmetric, yet our experience is not. We remember the past, but not the future. We see eggs breaking, but never spontaneously reassembling. In the holophase language, this arrow shows up as a bias in the kinds of temporal stories that are allowed to persist. Patterns that increase disorder are vastly more common than those that reverse it. So the dominant temporal meaning at large scales is from order to disorder, from low entropy to high entropy. This is not just a physical fact, it is a narrative fact about the stories phi most often tells when many degrees of freedom are involved. Clocks are our attempt to standardize and share temporal meaning. An atomic clock ties the definition of the second to a very specific microscopic rhythm in cesium atoms. By agreeing on that rhythm, we align our lives, our technologies, and our measurements. In holophase terms, we have picked one particular omega as a reference word in the language of time, and we measure all other rhythms relative to it. This is not so different from choosing a standard meter in space or a standard rest mass in particle physics. It shows again that time is not just there. It is something we actively read and codify. Before we finish, it is helpful to step back and see where we are in the larger holophase tree. We began at the root, with phi itself, the single cyclic field. We then learned its first derivatives, omega, k, and v, as the core letters of time, space, and motion. We climbed through towers of nuance, adding curvature, acceleration, higher derivatives, and semantic stability. We saw how these towers combine to form identities, the stable words of the universe. In this part, we have stepped sideways into a new tower that asks not what structures exist, but what do these structures mean in each dimension. Today, we have taken the first step up that tower by focusing on time. From here, the journey continues in a natural way. Just as we have treated time as a semantic dimension, we will treat space and motion as dimensions of meaning. Space will appear not only as distance and geometry, but as the carrier of separation, proximity, shape, and context. Motion will appear not only as velocity and trajectory, but as the carrier of intention, interaction, and relationship. By the time we reach the top of this new tower, the holophase language will appear not only as a physical description of reality, but as a unified theory of how reality encodes, transforms, and communicates meaning across all scales. As we move forward, remember that every technical symbol we use is also a letter in a larger story. Omega is not only a frequency, it is the beat of a drum. Alpha is not only a derivative, it is the quickening or slowing of that beat. Each equation in the holophase program is a compressed sentence about how phi is allowed to unfold. Each solution to those equations is a particular narrative, a world line of meaning, lived out in time, shaped in space, and carried by motion. In every moment, you stand at the crossing of all these rhythms. Some you can hear, some you can feel, some are far too fast or slow to notice. Yet together they compose the temporal signature of your existence within the holophase field. As we close this part, let one thought rest gently in your awareness. The cosmos is not simply a collection of objects moving through time. It is a story told through time. Every so called thing is a subplot with its own tempo and arc. The slow, almost timeless story of mountain ranges rising and eroding. The frantic, fleeting story of a mayfly's single day. The deep, rhythmic story of your own life, with its seasons of growth, struggle, and rest. You are a gathering of countless rhythms. Your heart, your breath, your brainwaves, your habits, and your memories are all temporal patterns layered together into what you call me. To understand time as meaning is to recognize that to exist is to have a rhythm, to persist is to tell a coherent story, and to live is to be a meaningful sentence unfolding in the ever present flow of the holophase. Now listen to the ticking of clocks, to the beating of your heart, to the silent rhythm of your own attention as it moves from thought to thought. You are beginning to hear, in a new way, the universe telling its story in time. Peace be upon you.